everybody. Welcome. We're so glad you're joining us today. My name is Dana Keep. I'm here with my colleague Becky King and our colleague Destiny Barletta, who's our Director of Alumni Connections. And we are very excited to have you joining us. This is a topic, communication is a topic that Becky and I have been talking about and do talk about quite a bit. We've been talking about doing a webinar for some time, because even though we mostly focus on career-related questions and strategies, we find that a lot of Wellesley alums want to talk about communication skills or communication challenges. And so we decided to gather some resources, ideas, approaches, practices from some of our favorite authors and bring them to you today. So as I said, in career advising sessions, because we're talking a lot about communication, we know that it's something important to all of you. It's true that given the pandemic and given the smartphone world we live in, and given the new realities of the hybrid workplace, communication skills have been challenged in many ways, and maybe some people are rusty. Maybe if you're a recent grad, you haven't had a chance to learn as much from colleagues as you might have if you're working remotely. So there's definitely, in the last couple of years, been some societal experiences that have changed the way we communicate and maybe made it harder in some ways and easier in some ways. But that is the reality we're living in. So our hope is that what we share today can really help you. There are so many places where we can all improve our communication skills. You know, Wellesley women are famous for helping each other learn about an industry, share ideas. And in order to connect with your fellow alums, you need to have some good communication practices. Also, if you're searching for a job, if you're interviewing for a job, those things often involve communication. Okay, let's say you get a new job and your first day on the job, your first month on the job, you're meeting coworkers, you're going to need those skills as well. Now you're working on a team with some of your colleagues, and you want to make sure that you've built some good relationships with them, because what if there's an unexpected obstacle and all of a sudden there's a crisis in getting this project done? It's going to go a lot more smoothly if you and your colleagues know each other and have built a strong, trusting relationship based on communication. And then finally, we also appreciate that Wellesley alums are very good at mentoring each other, and mentoring also uses communication skills. So those are the reasons why we are very happy that you're joining us today. And we look forward to the session, and we hope that you'll put any questions you have in the chat along the way.
Thanks, Dana. Happy Pi Day, by the way, to everyone. And I also wanted to begin with, I was talking with Dana yesterday and I said, oh my gosh, I should have been wearing my sweatshirt that said, it's a luxury to be understood. My mother had gotten it for me back in, probably back in the 80s. And it's a quote from Emerson. And, I thought how perfect for, let's mute. If you could just mute, that would be awesome. Thank you. It just seems apropos for our topic today. So I want you all to think, as we're beginning this, when was the last time that you felt truly seen and heard? When was the last time you truly listened carefully and deeply to somebody and felt you had a meaningful conversation and a communication was exchanged? Think about that, because it's increasingly rare that we're able to feel that way. We are moving so quickly on our devices, scattered in a million directions, focusing on doing and achieving, and we are not focusing enough time on reflection. So that is why we are here today. So we're going to be covering Charles Duhigg's new book. Thank you, Charles, for just publishing this. How timely. It's about super communicators, how to unlock the secret language of connection. And we're also going to be talking about David Brooks, who also published a new book, interestingly, both from Random House. And his book is How to Know a Person. You may be familiar with him as a columnist. Also, he's a commentator on PBS News. Another book we love is The Book of Beautiful Questions. We're referring to that today, by Warren Berger. And finally, a book we've referred to in past webinars on networking, written by a fellow colleague in career advising, Jane Matson, and it's called You, Me, You. And it's probably the most practical, short, sweet handbook you could possibly have on communicating with other people. So kick us off, Dana.
Okay, well, thanks for showing all the covers, Becky. And we are going to sort of focus on each book, but you'll see that there's some common themes and building on each other as we go through. So the first book, Charles Duhigg and Super Communicators, he is in the beginning talking a lot about the fact that there are different types of conversations. And, you know, we all know this, it's a different type of conversation you have with your neighbor than you do with your colleague, than, you know, someone you just met and someone you've known a long time. Those are kind of obvious, and they do all require different tactics and different practices. But his focus is on three kinds: practical, emotional, and social. And his premise is that when people are having different kinds of conversations at the same time, like one person thinks it's a practical one and the other person thinks it's emotional, that's where a lot of the communication mishaps occur. So practical conversations are, you know, let's get this done. Let's solve this problem. How do we accomplish this task? And they involve a lot of, you know, logistics and planning and strategy and sometimes negotiation and details and delegation. And so, you know, you can imagine we've all had those conversations. What do we do about this situation? How do we fix it, or how do we solve it? The emotional conversations are more about sharing your feelings. Oftentimes they're negative ones, like someone just needs to vent, or, you know, talk about the frustrating day they had getting home from someplace when the flight was delayed and you know, the airlines weren't being helpful and there's nothing to solve there necessarily. But sometimes people can just be wanting to vent and the other person is offering suggestions, and that's like a mismatch. And sometimes those conversations about sharing emotions can be happy ones too. Like, you know, if you and your partner are sharing, you're excited or proud of something that your kid did, and you want to just talk about it, so they don't all have to be venting. And the third one, the social conversations, are conversations that we have all the time where you're getting to know someone. Here's something about me, my identity, where I'm from, the things I like to do. Oh, and gee, we share that. You're also from that place, or you also speak that language, or you also are in the same industry, whatever it might be. So those are the getting to know you kinds of questions and conversations.
Yeah.
These
What? It's in the
somebody's
closet
still
somewhere.
unmuted, I
No?
think.
It's not
Maybe
there?
I looked, let me.
Sometimes we can do it in the chat, Becky.
Do it. I can do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. These three types of conversations align with something else you might have heard, where people talk about, in a conversation, do you want to be helped, hugged, or heard? And so, you know, helped, like, let's problem solve. Hugged, that could be, you know, theoretical hugging. Do you want to, you know, me to listen to your, what you're feeling right now? And heard, do you want me to understand more about who you are? So you may have heard the helped, hugged, and heard trio before, and it does kind of align with what Charles Duhigg describes. So it's important to know also that, you know, these conversations can flow. A conversation can begin as a problem solving endeavor and then move into an emotional conversation, or vice versa. And sometimes you could have all three conversations in a period of time that you might think was one conversation. So it's interesting if you start observing what exactly kinds of conversations you're having and where you and a coworker or even you and someone in your family. Obviously, we're focusing on workplace communications here, but these kinds of things happen in our personal lives too. So it's interesting to note when the differences are showing up.
He mentions that every conversation is a negotiation, and in his book, he actually delves into a few rather tense situations. So if any of you are involved in mediation or negotiation situations in your work, you'll find his book particularly interesting. And he references Getting to Yes, the famous book from 1980 from the Harvard Negotiation Project. Good listening involves physical, mental, emotional presence. And I think that's important for us all to remember as well. Excuse me. You've got to notice more than just what someone's saying, more than just the words. There's tone, facial expression, body language, posture. If I'm really excited about what you're saying, I'm leaning forward usually, or I'm, that type of thing shows that, and eye contact, of course, that I'm really paying attention. If I don't mean you have to intently look at someone like this, but it also means that you shouldn't be looking at your phone, looking at your Apple Watch, looking at your computer, whatever else is going on, because that's a big turnoff to the person who's trying to communicate with you for obvious reasons. So you want to notice body language, facial expressions, energy, mood. I think it's interesting I thought about this with, and he does mention this too, that 4-year-olds are really good questioners, and something happens after that. We become, as we age, less inclined to inquire, less inclined to be curious, less inclined to ask those questions. And with a 4-year-old, they'll ask anything. I mean, there's really typically no filter, and there's something refreshing about that. And as adults, we lose touch with that. And these books that we're talking about today remind us about leading with that curiosity. And a technique that Duhigg in Super Communicators calls looping for understanding. And in the Book of Questions, he calls it paraphrasing. It's the same thing in all of these books, but the idea is that you are verifying what someone's saying. So you're showing that you're listening. So if somebody says, I just had the most horrific conversation with my boss, I never feel appreciated, you would say, oh, you really feel underappreciated by your boss and you sound really frustrated. That must be really hard. Is that right? You're verifying that, and that shows you're really listening. Not, did you just say something about your boss? So his mantra, and he was asked this recently, I was listening to a radio interview with Charles Duhigg, and because of course, when you publish a book, you go on the book circuit publicity tour, and they said, okay, this is an unfair question. I know you've worked on this book for 3 years, but in 20 seconds, as we're closing, what would you say this book is really about? And he said, well, that's easy. Just connect with the other people, connect with the other person. It's as simple as that. And interestingly, both David Brooks and Charles Duhigg revealed that the reason they wrote this book and did the research is that while they're both professional writers, professional communicators, they found that they were having difficulty in their family life and with people they loved. They were not connecting. They were missing somehow. And so both of them said, well, I guess I'm a writer. I'm going to go write a book about this, and I'm going to go do some research and figure it out. So that's what they did. And we're the beneficiaries now of that. So, all right, back to you, Dana.
Absolutely. And yes, connection is what we're all trying to do here. And we learned during the pandemic that isolation was really not good for any of us in so many ways. And now not being in person as much as we might have been makes it a little more challenging to connect. So as we delved into David Brooks's book, How to Know a Person, we were interested that he really talks about the process. You think like, oh, well, you just meet someone, you talk and you know them, but he breaks it down a little bit more. He talks about, if you're open-hearted and you're interested, you want to connect with someone, and you recognize that you don't know them well, like those are all good intentions, but just wanting to do it doesn't get you far enough. You actually need to have some conversational skills, some interpersonal skills, some communication skills to advance getting to know them. So he talks about, being curious, revealing vulnerabilities at an appropriate pace, not pouring out your heart and soul the minute you meet someone. Seeing things from another's point of view, that's really important, obviously, these days. And all of these are steps along the way. Being able to disagree respectfully with people, and being able to listen well. We talk so much about listening skills. We're going to mention a few more things to focus on today. But we've heard of active listening, but it's very hard to do. It takes deliberate intention, and it takes focus. And we all know that the devices we're using all the time have probably impacted our ability to focus for periods of time. So the second thing that David Brooks brings up is something that Becky and I absolutely loved, and he talks about diminishers and illuminators. So through your conversations, you can be choosing to be an illuminator or a diminisher. It's not going to require much of explanation on my part, but illuminators make someone feel valued, make someone feel understood. They help you bring out your best ideas. They check in with you to make sure they're understanding. They make you feel confident, and they help you shine your light in the world. Diminishers, on the other hand, are looking around to see if there's anyone else they could be talking to. They're half listening. They seem to be daydreaming. They're not responding appropriately. And you're wondering, wow, am I saying something really dumb here or boring? And so you start to feel less good, and they don't help you be your best self. So that was one of our favorite things to come out of the David Brooks book, was that we, want to all keep that word illuminator in our head so that we can work on being better illuminators.
Yeah. And he confesses quite a bit in this book about his former self being quite he would make snarky remarks and think he was being humorous. And of course, that is a big turnoff. That turns you into a diminisher. So he's worked really hard on himself, and he says, you know what? The good news is you can learn. If I can learn, you can learn how to be an illuminator, how to be a better communicator. How can you do that? Well, we've talked about it already, but obvious: put away your devices, put away your phone. Also, nod, eye contact, verbal cues. Oh, yeah. That kind of thing, right? That tells people that you're there with them, and you're empathizing, and you're hearing them. Storify. This is interesting, and in another way of thinking about this is, how do you get the person to be more of a narrator? We are hardwired for stories. That's how, we are hardwired to need to connect. Our whole society, right? We're based on that. That's, what Margaret Mead said. She said, this is the mark of the start of civilization is, I can see that this was a broken femur. That means somebody cared for this person. And that fascinated me, because I love anthropology. But anyway, it fascinated me that that's her marker for when we as a society truly evolved. And so we want to connect. How can we make somebody a narrator? Well, you can ask them questions that are not just, what do you think of that? Or what do you believe about that? But how did you come to believe that, right? That's a better question. So that's a doorknob, if you want a term for it. Doorknobs help us open up and see the person's soul, rather than just a yes or no question, or a stop sign question, which would be, where was the wedding? Oh, it was at Fruitlands in Harvard. Oh, okay. And now we're done. If you said, how did you decide where to have the wedding? Well, that's an interesting question. So we looked at 20 different sites and, we finally got somebody referred us to this place called Fruitlands. Have you ever heard of it? And, then you really have a conversation going there. So doorknobs rather than stop signs. And don't be a topper. What he means by that is, I'm feeling really sad today. because I had to put my dog down. Oh my God, I had to do that last year. It was such a painful time. It was just the worst experience having to put my dog down. I cannot believe you had to go through that. Yeah, that's really what my wife cried for a week, and it was just so. Now he's just topped the other person's revelation, right? I'm confessing something vulnerable and painful, and you're a topper if you hijack the conversation and you take it away like that. Now, you may want to connect with people, and sometimes we do in the interest, we think, of connecting with them, say, I share that with you, but you have to be careful that you don't turn it into all about you and take away the conversation as if you're playing catch, but you didn't throw the ball back, right? So, all right, back to you, Dana.
Yeah, that was great. I just have to add, when you were talking about the listening skills, David Brooks had a great line about a friend of his that was so busy saying, that he said, this guy burns calories while he's listening. And that actually really made us laugh. And I think, could inspire me to do a little more action when I'm being a good listener. But anyway.
That was a good example of an illuminator who happens to be a pastor also, but yeah.
Yes, he said, man, I love talking to that guy. It was great. Okay, so we are moving through here, and now we're talking about the book of questions. This one's less new than the other two, but one that we've referred to often. And the subtitle of the book is Questions Designed to Help You Decide, Connect, Create, and Lead. And it's literally divided into 4 sections. And so for purposes of today's conversation, we focused on the connection one and the leadership one, because many of you probably lead teams in your careers, or maybe you are a leading by example team member. So connection and leading are important. Elie Wiesel wrote this book, and we loved the profound quote that he started with. People are united by questions. It's the answers that divide them. So just think about that one in your spare time later on today. But questions, he calls himself a questionologist, which I kind of like, but I think he made it up. Questions are what help us. I mean, you can learn some things about people by being with them, but really questions are what can accelerate and deepen those relationships. And being adept at asking questions is a skill. It's a muscle that we can all improve. Becky mentioned that Duhigg talked about being around 4-year-olds because 4-year-olds are just never ending with questions. And actually, I believe it was Brooks that also talked about an example with some 8th graders. So all younger than teenagers, let's put it that way. But I'm going to share that example briefly too here, where a teacher started her middle school class by letting her students know, okay, she wanted to help them be better questioners. So she said, you can ask me anything. And the questions went like this. Are you married? No. Were you ever married? Yes. Do you still love him? Yes. Does he know that? No. And so you could imagine, that sometimes we can go back to childhood, genuine, authentic, very honest questions. And sometimes that can inspire us to be better questioners today.
I also think at the start of the book of beautiful questions, and this was worth mentioning, 5 enemies of questioning. Fear, number 1. We're afraid that we might be wrong. We might sound stupid. We might reveal that we don't know. And so fear gets in our way of asking questions. Number 2, knowledge. We rely on what we already know. We want to sound knowledgeable. We want to sound wise. We want to dispense advice. So the problem with that is we're not expanding. We're not building into new knowledge that way. We're just relying on the knowledge we already have, which may or may not, in fact, still be accurate. Number 3 and 4 are interconnected: bias and then hubris. I think those are self-explanatory. Of course, we all have biases, but it's worth to be better reflective questioners, asking ourselves, why do I feel that way? Why do I feel so strongly about this? Rather than dispensing, and I could take something, you could take something political, like, like gun rights or something. And why do I feel that way? And in fact, in one of these books, in fact, it's Duhigg's book, he does get into a gun control versus gun rights conversation. And each of them has a bias, and then they share why they have their bias. And so by doing so, they created a bond and built some trust. For example, the teacher who was for gun control said, you know what? I have to tell you why I feel the way I do. I feel the way I do because there was an intruder. There was a shooter at our school. 2 children were wounded. A teacher was killed. That is why I feel the way I do. The gun rights activist said, and I feel the way that I do because I grew up and my father and I would go hunting and we bonded that way over our trips. I really looked forward to time with my father doing that. And that is why I feel the way I do. Now you can extrapolate and go beyond that, obviously, but the point is they weren't trying to persuade each other. They were simply sharing why I have my bias. Hubris is where you take it one step further and you say, everyone else is biased, but I'm right. And so you stop questioning yourself. And the 5th enemy of questioning is time. And I think I referred to that earlier, but time is the scarce resource that we feel we have now, and we're pressured to do more, produce more quickly. We have AI, we have technology at our fingertips, so it's go, 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 do. And that does not allow us space for inquiry. All right.
So a couple of other pieces of research that came out in Elie Wiesel's book are the fact that people actually like people who ask them questions. Obviously, it has to be an appropriate question, asked nicely, asked in the right way. But generally speaking, people enjoy being asked and they feel that someone is caring about them and interested in them. And then secondly, in terms of leadership, we always think like, well, leaders have to have the answers. But in the era of rapid change that we're living in, it is becoming increasingly clear that the best leaders are those who have the humility and the confidence to ask questions and get some unexpected answers.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, I also wanted to mention, many of you might have seen the series Ted Lasso, but Elie Wiesel talks about be curious, not judgmental. And there was a famous, or there was a, not famous, there was a well-known line in Ted Lasso where he was throwing darts and he said, be curious, not judgmental. And I would add to judgmental, to suspend your assumptions. We all make assumptions. We all make judgments when we meet people. It's easy to do. It's human. There's nothing bad about it. I said to Becky, along the way, many people asked my tall son, oh, you must have played basketball. Well, he was terrible at basketball. So even those silly things are, assumptions and judgments that we make all the time. But the idea is to kind of put them aside or try to not focus on that when you're asking questions. And you wouldn't say to somebody, oh, you must think that because you're from California. You might say instead, I assumed that you would say that because you're from California. Instead, you would ask questions that would get to that point without being quite so direct, because that would be weird. You might say, well, what was it like to grow up in California? What experiences did you have with X topic or something like that? So you can you can actually verify or change your assumptions by asking good questions, but you don't actually have to call it out that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then actually, 2 more things. Well, one more thing. This one, I'm compiling a couple things here, but in terms of questions, Becky talked about the doorknobs and story questions, but sometimes there's some great questions that are just, tell me more, and what else about that?
Mm-hmm.
Or echoing questions like, wow, that was rough. And then people will, it's amazing what they'll tell you in the second round. If you say, tell me more, or what else, they'll tell you a lot more and often something a lot deeper than they told you in their first headline of the story. So I wanted to make sure to get those in.
That's like a pro tip, since we said we wanted to give you practical strategies to take away with you today. Yes, one of the things in the Warren Berger's book, Beautiful Book of Questions, or Book of Beautiful Questions, is the awe question, AWE, which is what you just said, Dana, and what else? And that will draw people out. It's also a good manager approach to say, so what's not working for this company and why isn't it working and what else, right? So they talk about it, he talks about it that way. Another, advise less, inquire more. It's easy to give advice. We like the status of an advice giver, and he talks about that. And we don't like to give up that status, right? It's high status to be the advisor. You feel pretty good. But when you ask questions, you're stepping into ambiguity, lower status, and vulnerability, but you connect better with someone. So just remember that sometimes we think Yoda is the way to go, Merlin's the way to go, etc. And there is a place for Yoda, there is a place for Merlin, but also Yoda or Merlin could ask themselves some questions and get a little further with connecting. So there's advise less, inquire more, the awe question, and also wait, WAIT, wait. Why am I talking question? It forces you to pause, because one of the things that gets in the way, we talked about nonverbal eye contact, and verbal cues. We didn't talk about a major detractor from good communication, which is that many people, we're all guilty of this at some point, are so eager to jump in and speak that we're fixating on what we want to say so much that we're not able to really listen, because we know the brain can't really multitask. So if we're thinking about, oh, I gotta make my point, we're not listening. So wait, why am I talking? Is it necessary for me to talk right now, or should I just sit back and listen for a little bit longer? So it cultivates a reflective attitude. Moving on to our fourth, there goes my mouse. Moving on to our fourth and final book today. You can read this book in less than an hour. I love it. I think it's so applicable. Dana and I have referred to this book many times. If you're at a networking event, if you're meeting a friend for lunch, if you are any situation that you're in, you can use you, me, you. Professionally, The Art of Talking to People, Networking, and Building Relationships is the subtitle. I think it's a helpful structure, particularly when you're not quite sure, feeling awkward, etc. I could come into pretend we're at a conference in Washington, D.C., and I walk up to Dana and I say, hi, I'm Becky. What's your name?
Hi, I'm Dana. Hi, I'm Dana. So nice to meet you.
Oh, it's great to meet you. So I'm going to do you, me, you, and to demonstrate that. And think of it this way: the first you is the initiate the conversation and the relationship. Then you followed up with another question about the other person, which is engaging them, shows them you listened and you're engaging them. Then you come back to connect with me, develop the relationship further by sharing something about yourself. And you end with you to strengthen the relationship. So, hi, Dana, I'm Becky. It's great to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well, Becky.
And then I say, so, have you been in DC before?
Well, actually, I have. This was the first city I moved to after my college graduation, and I lived here for 5 years. It's such a great city. I'm really happy to be back.
So I resist the urge to say, I lived there after college too. And instead I say, wow, you lived there for 5 years. That's fascinating. What are some of your favorite things to do there?
Well, undoubtedly, not to sound like a cliche, but being able to wander in and out of museums is a unique experience about DC that you don't have in other cities. And just walking by the main events, the White House, the Congress building, everything like that. I just found it all very exciting in my 20s. I loved it. I loved seeing the motorcade zoom by. I really found it all kind of exciting, and also walking around the monuments at night, I always thought was a special experience.
Oh, definitely. The monuments at night is one of my favorite things. And it's funny, I lived there briefly for a bit too.
Oh, did you?
College, Dana. Yeah,
Oh.
not for long, not just under a year actually. But I did I did find it an exciting city, so I agree with you on that.
What were
Listen,
your
I love-
favorite things?
well, I'll tell you about that in a little bit, but first I want to ask you again, what are some of your tips? I haven't been back to DC in a while. Do you have any tips for while we're here of good places to go visit on our free time?
Oh,
Oh, anyway, we don't need to belabor it, but you
Yeah.
get the idea. Even when she said, "Oh, tell me more about yourself," I resisted because it's you, me, you, and I went back to you, Dana. And obviously, you can carry this further if you want, but that is a good. It's just a good framework to keep, and you can use this with friends as well, obviously.
I don't know if any of you can share this experience. I have one friend and one relative that I think in their mind, it's you. And I have to work really hard to say, okay, I'm going to stop. I really want to hear how your business is going, or I really want to hear how your daughter's college search is going. I mean, I have to literally be forceful about that with these couple of people in my life. And they're wonderful, open, warm-hearted, generous, caring, loving people, and I love them for it. But I really have to be harsh sometimes, I feel like, because otherwise they will do nothing but keep asking. So, and before I also wanted to share the author of the You Me You book refers to Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, which most of you of a certain age will have heard of. And the quote that that she loved from that book was, "You can make more friends in 2 months by being interested in others than you can in 2 years by trying to get other people interested in you." And ironically, I don't remember much about my own college graduation speech. It was many years ago at this point, but for the baccalaureate address that our college president said 5 do's and 5 don'ts. And the one thing I remember from the whole thing was he said, everyone thinks the goal is to be interesting, but actually the goal is to be interested. And so it's pretty much the same thing as Dale Carnegie. And that has stuck with me for all these years.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and she does also have here's another pro tip. She says if you're really searching and just floundering for what to say about this you, me, you, tell me more. That's always a good one. It's one of those awe questions. And what else? Tell me more. I'm really fascinated. Tell me more about that. That sounds really fun. Or if you're stuck with a me person, you can either try to interject and put something about yourself there because you do want the other person to remember you. So it's important you do get something about yourself in there. Or you can simply say, I've been listening to this person go on and on about themselves. I'm about to leave and go talk to somebody else. And you can just at that point say, I would love to talk to you more, but right now I need to go with someone across the room. I'll be right back. And then you leave because you want more of an exchange. So she does say all of that's fair game. So we have some miscellaneous tips to close with, and then we wanted to save time for questions, which we were hoping you all had some questions, comments, concerns, and what else coming, but we wanted to wrap up with some we were debating the word. Here I used miscellany again, Dana, and we said, no, it's actually, we should be talking about final thoughts.
We like parting thoughts even better than miscellaneous.
Yeah.
So very briefly, yes. I think we briefly mentioned authenticity, but you really can't fake being curious about other people. So you should make an effort to find something that you are genuinely curious about, because it is a much better way to connect. You can't really connect by faking that. And secondly, I think we said this earlier, but better communication takes time. It might be the 10 minutes you spend talking to a colleague after a tough meeting, or it might be the quick note of support that you write to a colleague who's going through a tough time. It might be when you welcome a new colleague and you ask them if they need help with finding a dentist or something like that. Every time you move to a new workplace, you use these skills, and there really is no way to speed them up. And, connections can't really be built without them. So we hope that what we've shared today has given you some practical ideas, practical questions, a practical approach, practical thoughts to help you. And, you know, there might be a couple that you want to implement right away. We've shared a couple of quotes here, but there's maybe one final one that will spur us all on, that is widely attributed to George Bernard Shaw. And he said the single biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has taken place. So hopefully, Destiny liked that one. Good job. Hopefully what we're practicing here will help it be less of an illusion and actually more real communication.
And actually, that reminded me, we did have, we came across a Harvard Business Review article, and really quickly, as a miscellany, put it in your back pocket for future situations, is a simple way to introduce yourself. And so we've all been in those situations where you're in either it's a conference or it's a workshop, or you're new to, you know, an office space, a work culture, and they say, okay, so some of us are new today, so we're going to go around and introduce each other and then introduce ourselves. And I don't know about you all, but sometimes I would feel kind of nervous about that. Like, oh, I have to sound really exciting here. What am I supposed to say about myself? Oh, no. So this article is very succinct, but the idea here is present, past, future. And so present would be, hi, I'm Ashley. I'm a software engineer. My current focus is optimizing customer experience. Then you can go into the next part of your introduction is, my background is in computer science. Before joining this team, I worked with big data to identify insights for our clients in the healthcare industry. And then you can finish with, I'm really happy to be here. I'm excited to work with you all on improved solutions for client problems, or something like that, right? So just remember, instead of how we usually think past, present, future, it's present, past, future. That's a good tool technique for introducing yourself. And with that, we will say thank you all for being here. I will stop the recording so you will all feel free to chime in with questions. Thank you.